Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another webinar in the Barts 900 series. My name is Robert Trahan-Jones. I'm joined by our guest, Lars Tharp, the historian and broadcaster. Just a few words before we start. It really is fantastic to see here in the Henry VIII room at Barts a real live audience for the first time in 2 years. So we have a number of people here in the room tonight. We have a great many more out there joining us online. Wherever you are in the world, you are extremely welcome. And for the next step in our progress towards the £9 million target that we're aiming for the first phase of our works here at Barts Heritage, I'm incredibly pleased to report that we are already 80% of that target underway. But the hard work does not stop. As you will have realized from the newsletters that we've been sending out for the last several months, we rely on you, our members and our guest visitors, to be able to spread the word of the good work, the fundraising work that we're trying to do. Now, the good news is we're not looking to you to write out a check for £1 million each. No, what we would value, though, is names and organizations of charitable organizations, philanthropic societies, with which you have some connection. Just give us the name and the contact details, and then our fundraising team can do the hard work in working towards generating funds from that particular source, which has already worked very much in to our advantage over the last few months. As far as the 900th events are concerned, very much in our sight, because less than a year to go towards View Day in our anniversary year 2023. We would love to be able to share with you the calendar of events that we've got lined up for 2023. But the committee responsible for that is not yet in a position to finalize those details, even though we know full well that there are many of you right across the world who are keen to save the dates, get your diaries sorted out, and particularly your travel arrangements to the UK for another visit back to Barts Hospital. So we'll bring you that news just as soon as we're able. Anyway, look, that's enough from me. What we really need to do is to crack on with the business of the evening. As I say, my guest on this occasion, the historian and broadcaster, Lars Tharp. Lars, a very warm welcome to you to the Barts 900 series.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you. Great to be here.
Now, what a great title, isn't it? Harlots, Rakes, and Crashing China. I think I get the bit about the Harlots and the Rakes. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, the title is an unashamed attempt to get more people into a lecture than you could possibly get if you were saying the life and times of William Hogarth. But there are a number of things I want to cover in this, and I don't want to disappoint you because there will be plenty of Harlots. There'll be one or two Rakes, but I'm also trying to couch into it the general times of William Hogarth, England's greatest native-born artist. I don't think anyone is going to disagree with that. Thank you. And also, it's a sort of psychological study, if you see it that way, how a young man born into a relatively poor family in a pretty grim part of London, Smithfield, dare I say, as it was, how he becomes who he became, and what his major stages along that progress were.
So what's the link? Because many of our visitors here online in person will know you and your history. For goodness sake, you've been doing Antiques Roadshow for more than 30 years.
Yeah.
And ceramics there is your specialist area. Yeah. Where's the crossover? Tell us more about that.
Well, we're going to see a detailed answer to that question a little bit later on. But essentially, it was becoming aware that looking at the works of William Hogarth, his paintings, his prints, that one becomes aware of all the chattels in the rooms, in the interior domestic panoramas, and you find all sorts of interesting things leaping out at you. And way back in the 1980s, when I was in the National Gallery, I spotted one particular series, we will come to it, which did that. And I suddenly thought, oh, that looks interesting. And I'm afraid that I now have somewhere in the region of 18 talks on William Hogarth using different angles. But this is a maiden run, Robert, this one. Not only the technology is completely new to me, but the way in which I've constructed this is a new talk.
Well, it's a maiden run for all of us in that occasion, Lars. Those of you in the room will be able to see some of the technology that you've got laid out before you that enables us to put on these talks. Those of you online, hopefully you think it's an entirely seamless production. That's that's what we hope to achieve. So why not? Let's crack on, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so.
Well, you talked about porcelain, so I thought, well, we've got to start off with a piece of porcelain. And it's not about me, but I can't resist putting in a Danish flag. And there is a Danish flag on the back of a Danish merchantman sailing from China back to Denmark. And if you look very closely at the stern, you will see the name Mars. It's a very unusual thing to find a piece of Chinese porcelain with a portrait, a beautiful portrait of a ship, and to actually be able to tell you what the ship is. Let's see whether we can just show you a little premonition of why I'm showing you this bowl. If we turn the bowl around, you will find a William Hogarth scene, one of his most famous images called the Midnight Modern Conversation. And in the middle of that table, where the gentlemen are having a, shall we say, a lively early morning, it's not midnight, it's 4 o'clock in the morning, you can see in the grandfather clock. But the bowl they're drinking out of is nothing like the bowl in the Hogarth original print. So here you have a piece of Chinese porcelain with a Hogarth image painted by a Chinese in China and exported to Denmark. And now that is a very, very interesting sequence. And I wanted to sort of get, how does that happen? So we're going to go somewhere with that. You have to take your pills with you because it can be a rocky journey as we go. But we are just next door to where William Hogarth was born. His family lives in Bartholomew Close. William was one of 9 children, 8 or 9 children born to the Hogarth parents. Only 3 of them survived into adulthood, William being one. His brother died and he had 2 sisters who lived into adulthood. This was not a great start in life, and it was a very poor part of London. Well, the streets were running with the blood of cattle from Smithfield and of humankind from the hospital, dare I say. Perhaps things have changed. The father couldn't find a job as a Latin tutor, so he set up a coffee shop. Coffee and tea and chocolate were all very exotic commodities arriving in London in the 1660s. And each coffee shop had to have its own USP. It had to have a gimmick. And we know, of course, that Lloyd's Coffee House, their gimmick was that everybody had to come bringing information about ships coming and going of ships, and thereby the insurance business was born. But hang on. Richard Hogarth in the 1680s is a late comer to this. What's he going to do? I know we will have an all Latin speaking coffee house. So they set up just north of here. It's only about half a mile up through Smithfield in St. John's Gate. And amazingly, this experiment, all Latin speaking, was a total failure. And so Richard was sent to nearby Fleet Prison. This is a contemporary print of how a well-meaning group of wealthy people have come to visit the poor man who's looking for alms. But this is a situation very similar to the Dickensian Marshalsea in Little Dorrit, you know. Yep. And so Hogarth has a bad start. His father is in prison and his mother is going to have to make ends meet. And one of the ways they do this, they send a young lad off to a silver engraver and purveyor of silver called Ellis Campbell in Covent Garden. And this is a 19th century imagined view of the young William sitting at a bench, engraving an incongruously enormous piece of silver. He was actually only going to be engraving the bottom and the tips of knives and forks, which he absolutely loathed. He didn't complete his apprenticeship, he had more about him, and he decided he wanted to become an artist. He set up as an independent printer. He printed ephemera, theatre programs, ex libris labels, the occasional satirical squib, but that wasn't enough. And he decided to take painting lessons from none other than Sir James Thornhill. Now, James Thornhill was probably the most famous living native English artist, and had already painted the interior of the cupola at St. Paul's, the great room at Greenwich, of course, and this was a major painter. For this young lad, scraping things together from nothing, suddenly to foist himself on Sir James was really quite something. But in this early portrait, well, this is 1730s, you'll see there's a determination in this self-portrait. It gives, I mean, this is my favorite of the self-portraits of Hogarth. You can see this is a young man determined to make his way, as he did. He even had a little miniature made of himself. And those of you, are there any medics present this evening? Are you going to give me a diagnosis, Robert? Well, what's going on here in the forehead?
Well, he's got that funny dent in his forehead, doesn't he?
Yes, yes. And the diagnosis? No, I don't want to put you on the spot.
GBH?
Well, that's a possibility. That's a possibility. Whilst he was learning to paint with Sir James, he caught the eye of, or was it the other way around, Jane Thornhill, his only daughter. And they fell in love. And I don't know when Jane was born, but she would have been less than 18 years old, certainly. And I imagine that Sir James and Lady Thornhill were not entirely happy about this match. But as we shall see, things move on. This is actually a portrait of Jane rather later on than the actual courtship. We'll come to that later. And they married in 1729, and immediately William started working on his first moral subject series. It's basically a story in 6 parts about a young girl who arrives in London. She's intercepted, she's innocent, but she's intercepted by a board, and the board installs her with a wealthy businessman, and the story goes downhill from there on. And the very final stage, you will see in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm afraid we find that Moll, or Harlot, is dead in her coffin. And I put a yellow circle around there because the nameplate on the coffin, when you look really closely with your quizzing glass, it actually gives you her name, age 23. And you'll see that at the foot of the coffin, there is a little lad, her son, who I would guess must be around 4 years old. So yeah, it's a sad story. But the thing we should be surprised about being in the 21st century, in our very precious present, here is a series which caught the public's imagination. They found it entertaining, they found it instructive, and they enjoyed it. It was a piece of entertainment. You couldn't, you'd have to have a warning these days if you put that story out on TV. So we're living in an age where horror and comedy sit side by side. That is actually quite an important part of how Hogarth works. Now,
the crash in China.
The crash in China, we got there. In the second of these images, you'll see that she's creating a diversion. She wants to allow her lover to escape from the bedroom whilst her sugar daddy is still having tea. And Hogarth gives us this lovely little detail of the crashing tea service. Look closely at that crashing tea service. It's got a replacement wood handle, and some teapots do have replacement wood handles and spouts. But look even more closely at the spout. The teapot is actually still pouring as it sails through the air. I mean, this gives you an insight into William Hogarth's, sense of humor. But it also reinforces us in you really do have to look with the spine, the quizzing glass when you're looking at the detail of Hogarth. So anyway, I thought this was rather fun, and I thought, well, I could start giving talks about ceramics using Hogarth images. I'm afraid that's the next stage where she actually takes up, how do we say this, the mass market rather than the exclusive single sugar daddy market. And here Hogarth manages to pepper the entire scene with ceramics of a much lowlier state. The cracked punch bowl is a good clue. Nothing is accidental in a Hogarth image. Everything is there to be read. We have to almost treat it as a literary work.
And there's a lot of fine details, so that there are stories within stories.
Yes. I think the extraordinary thing about this man is he's able to create really quite a complicated series of vocabularies within an image, but the whole image doesn't come across as crowded. It seems natural. It's only when you start looking at it in detail that, oh, hadn't noticed that. Has anybody noticed the washing line at the back there? Now, being the august audience that we have here, you will all recognize an 18th century condom when you see one. And there they are drying on the line. She's about to be arrested for harlotry. Anyway, we're going to have to park her there for the time being. I put this in for you, Robert. You are, I'm told, an oarsman.
Yes, rumor has it that way.
So you can tell me about this figure.
Well, he's a professional waterman.
Yes.
He's wearing the waterman's coat. And that, I assume, is his license plate as a professional waterman on his left arm.
Yeah.
Because that is the typical site for a license plate. But I don't recognize that insignia.
No, nor do I. I was hoping that you were going to enlighten me. But a snagged anchor, I think is what that would be called, in the famous race that was set up from the late 18th century, which you will know all about. Have you ever participated in Doggett's coat and badge races?
Well, never having been an apprentice waterman myself, the nearest I've got is commentating on the race.
Yeah.
And we've got the 2022 version coming up in the third week in July.
Ooh.
And we've mentioned that on a previous Barts webinar, because one of our guests was one of our GB Olympic scullers, Jack Beaumont, on his way to Tokyo last year. And so we were talking all matters of sculling, and Jack's answer, his grandparents were a Barts doctor and a Barts nurse. That was the.
We could go on, couldn't we? But we've had another 150 slides to have a look at.
And that's just the edited version.
This is by the Bow factory further downstream, and they produce these wonderful things from the 1740s onwards. So we are already well into Hogarth's middle to later life when that was made, but I couldn't resist putting it in because it does sort of lead us into an episode, which I called 5 Men Behaving Badly. It's called The Peregrination of Kent, and it involves 5 players: Jonathan Thornhill, son of James; Ebenezer Forrest. Oh, if only I'd had a son, I would have called him Ebenezer. It's a great name. William Totthall, William Hogarth, and Samuel Scott, another 30-year-old something artist. They were all friends together, and they decide, after Hogarth's Harlot is published, Hogarth makes a lot of money. He becomes famous overnight. And that was published in April 1732. And so in May 1732, these men are somewhere in the Bedford Tavern. And one evening I say, wouldn't it be a great idea if we all went down the river?
So this is a boys' weekend.
It was a boys' outing. And so they decide they're going to have a jolly frolic. And that's what's going to happen from now on. They leave Covent Garden, they go down to the Thames, just south. You can just see here in the bottom left, there's the old London Bridge. Good idea to board your skiff south of the bridge, or to east of the bridge, because the level difference between the water on the land side of the bridge and the ebbing tide is so big sometimes, it's like actually shooting through a weir. So you go down there to the stairs just outside Billington, and I found this lovely model in the National Maritime Museum. And you will instantly tell me what sort of a vessel this is.
It's a wherry.
It's a wherry, yes, or a tilt.
And interestingly, because the street up here is St Mary at Hill.
Yes.
It's the street up here.
Yeah.
And Waterman's Hall, the hall of the Waterman's Company, is right there on the left.
Good grief.
There we go.
And he's actually almost put his finger on it as well. Fantastic. Well, we're going to imagine them sailing off. It's just gone midnight, by the way. They've had a jolly good sing-song, and off they go in something like that. This is actually a painting by Samuel Scott later on, and I think he's sort of remembering the journey they went on. And now, ladies and gentlemen, take your tea pill, because if we're lucky, we might be able to glide down with the ebb tide, passing. This is important. Passing the National Maritime and the hospital at Greenwich. So we'll come back to that. They were aiming for Gravesend, which is 25 miles downstream. They arrived there around 5 o'clock in the morning. They had breakfast, and they then decided to go over the hills. But before that, they had their morning toiletry done. And this is William Hogarth's own self-portrait, sitting down, doing a sketch of his chums, Jonathan Thornhill, Ebenezer, Sam, Scott, Mr. Trottle, and our hero, William Hogarth, sitting crouched in the corner. This is a picture which appears in an album, which we are now going to go through very rapidly. As the friends go over the hills, they aim for Rochester, and they get to the very distinguished inn, the Crown at Rochester. This is a Victorian version. There's been a Crown Inn here forever and ever, but they arrive here after an adventurous early morning, and you can go to the Crown Inn today, and they take their ease. I'm just going to do a little tease here, because only 5 years later, 1737, there was a school here, Joseph Williamson's mathematical school, where David Garrick was an actor. And there's a lovely, delicious piece of resonance here. But the town hall, here it is, has a colonnade underneath, and they start writing a diary. And we know that that Scott and Hogarth started playing hopscotch underneath the columns here. And when you go there to this, I mean, Rochester does not look very different in the centre to what it did when they arrived there. But it was that time for something to eat. So they settled at the Crown from 1 o'clock until 3. We were at dinner on a dish of soles and flounders with crab sauce, a calf's heart stuffed, roasted, and the liver fried, and the other appurtenances minced, a leg of mutton roasted, and some green peas, all very good and well dressed with good small beer and excellent port. It's now between 1 o'clock and 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They ate very well. That was recorded in the diary. And they went to have a look at the castle. Now, they pretend to be antiquarians. A lot of this journey is very tongue-in-cheek. They're going about this as if they are grand tourists who are stuck in Rochester rather than in Florence or Venice or one of the other grand tourists. So they go to the Norman Castle in Rochester. And Hogarth records, or Ebenezer Forrest records, that there is a very curious hollow channel running down the center of the castle. And in fact, it is the castle well, because if you're under siege, you'll need to get water. And they note that there's a young lad who goes down into the well, and he uses the stones on the side of the well, and he comes back up the well with a nest of magpies. Whether they ate them as well, I do not know. But they go through the town through the afternoon. They go to Chatham, the docks. They look at the naval ships there. They come back and they are thoroughly tired and have a good sleep. Next day, they start their perambulation. They go round the northern shore of the Medway. The tour is grandly called a Grand Tour of Kent, but it's the Medway towns. That's where they're really going.
So what was the primary reason? Was it to visit these antiquarian sites? Was it to visit areas of fine food and wine, or actually a bit of both?
Do you know, I don't think they knew themselves. They actually cast lots at this stage. They cast lots. Does anybody want to go home? They said, if anybody wants to leave now, they can leave. But nobody wanted to leave. They were just having fun. It was very laddish. I mean, these are men in their 30s. We would say they were somewhat childish by maybe present lights, but they stuck together. They eventually got to Upnor Castle, which is on the north shore there, and that's Hogarth's drawing of Upnor Castle. And you see, he's put their self-portraits in there, and guess which one is William Hogarth? D. He was barely 5 feet tall. And so for that matter, Scott was also, but we'll see. Hogarth has no problem with this. He actually obviously likes having fun, whatever. So, but now if you go to Upnor and you stand on the foreshore there today, and I've done this a number of times, and you look that way, this is what you see. It's not changed. It's the same place. Well, you wouldn't expect it necessarily to change, but it is wonderful to go around the British Isles and find a place that really it looks just like it did when an artist recorded it back in the 18th century. So this little album, this diary that is being kept, is interleaved with about 5 or 6 images by Hogarth and Scott. They talk about going through North Street Farm, and I found North Street Farm. I mean, it's the back of Beyond and the Isle of Grain, and there is a sign saying North Street Farm. And it was there they found a butt of water, and they started having water fights and making themselves very wet and muddy in the process. And they also stopped at a pub called the Nag's Head, not that very one, but it's obviously the same name in the same place. And then as we move on, we go to, well, it was called the Chequers Inn, and it's just as you get to the edge of the Isle of Grain, and look what they've called it. It's no longer the Chequers Inn, it's the Hogarth Inn, which is rather nice. And when you look at the front of the inn, you'll see this is one of those rather recondite puns. But they obviously decided that it needed a rake. Of course, the rake's progress is what we're referring to. But hey, there you have a nice hay rake. I thought that was wonderful. And they carry on until you get to the tip of the Isle of Grain, and then they want to go to Sheerness. And here we have contemporary print of Sheerness from the Isle of Grain. So they need to get across this expanse of water. And this is what happens. They pass another wherry. Is that a wherry? They hitchhike, and it comes over to them, and it's going to transport them over to the other side. And again, lovely portraits of them. And they have decided to label themselves in there as well. So here we go. If I can remember them all. A is the boat. B is Tothall at the helm. C, I think, is Ebenezer Forrest helping D, who is William Hogarth, trying to get into the boat. That looks dangerous.
He looks as though he's lying down having a rest there after a surfeit of booze at the pub.
They certainly had booze. And then this little character who's being pushed by Tothall, I think, is Sam Scott, and he was the constant butt of their practical jokes throughout the whole journey. You get these delightful little insets, and Hogarth has written all the names in. They pass over to Queensbury on Sheppey, and it looks pretty similar today. Here's the huddle of our heroes in the High Street. They remark in the diary that they thought the town was very empty. There were no pretty women to behold. There was a group of sailors who'd been marooned there by their serving officer, who'd obviously gone in search of the local talent, and they had not a bean between them. So this group of our friends, they gave them money, which kept them going. And in that town, there is a church, and not a very remarkable church, except when you go inside, there are some rather good monuments. And in the spirit of antiquarianism, sending it all up, they make a verbatim transcription of this late 17th century memorial tablet. And the clue here, does anybody want to guess what the trade of the man who's being memorialized here might have been?
Fletcher.
A Fletcher, that's a good guess. That's a good guess. But it's a spear. It's a whaling spear. And this man is being commemorated by his widow as having gone up into the north of Greenland and where he did whales and penguins slay. Hang on, he couldn't have been eating penguins, could he? No. It's something else he slays, but not penguins. But anyway, they transcribe this verbatim. Henry Knight, daughters, died on the 8th day of April, anno 1657, aged 53 years. Mariner, sometimes mayor of this town, who went with a ship to Greenland and here did 24 voyages in Greenland. Whales, Norse bears, that was it, polar bears, did slay, though now my body is entombed in clay. Anyway, it's amazing. You go to that church there, and it's still there, and it's in the diary. So out of Queensferry, they moved on. I'm skipping several of these stopovers, but Thornhill, John Thornhill, son of Sir James, sergeant painter to the king, very important man, was the cartographer. So in the album, we have this lovely little map of the journey they made. There's the Isle of Grain, the tip of it there, and these are the places. So they arrived in, well, it's off the map. They arrived up here in Gravesend, walked across the fields, Rochester, etc. So they've basically followed the Medway all the way up there and gone over to Sheerness. And now we'll see a couple more visits in. They are. That's the tour they do over 5 days, and then the return journey back into the Thames, and the return attempts to get back into boats.
This labeling that Hogarth did with the letters of the alphabet to indicate the individual figures, was this characteristic of him, or were there others who followed the same sort of pattern?
It is the general way of indexing a panorama. In all of the panoramas of the various British cities, you'll find that there are explanations, and there is a caption line below. So that's very much in the style. I mean, you could regard that, it's actually a very nice point there, Rob, because you could regard that as a sort of another send-up of a well-known way of indexing, a scholarly tone with all the information that you need. There is Sir James. I imagine Sir James discovering that his new son-in-law is doing a series called The Harlots' Progress. It wouldn't fill you with joy, would it? Speaking as a man with 2 daughters myself, I think, oh. But Hogarth, through this series, managed to convince Sir James that he was a highly accomplished, or likely to become a highly accomplished artist. And here we have our friends, after 5 days, sailing back upriver, passing Greenwich. And I think that William Hogarth looked over the port beam and thought, my father-in-law has decorated this place rather well. And it's stuck in there. Of course, he knew that anyway in St. Paul's Cathedral, but it became a part of his fabric. So there we have the very distinguished Mr. Palin showing a group round the painted room at Greenwich. And of course, it is one of the great rooms in London. It's a wonderful place. And they charged. That's how they made money. they charge people entry. I think there's a little catalogue, wasn't they, produced for visitors. So that's what they do today, and that's what charities did in the 18th century. And yes, those wall paintings are absolutely spectacular. So this is all in William Hogarth's mind, and it goes. There is just one of the pages in the handwriting of Ebenezer Forrest. Right. At the end of the day, they did the reckoning, and Mr. Tothall totaled it up, and it came to a very nice round 6 guineas for the entire trip for 5 men, eating and lodge and everything. So when Hogarth got back, he started work on the next piece of success, which was going to be the sequel to Harlot. And this, of course, is the Rakes Progress. It hangs in St. John Soane's Museum, and it's an 8-part series. I mean, that really is something. And of course, it was lapped up. And Hogarth himself had it engraved, and he made a lot of money. He made over £1,000 on Harlot's Progress. And so he was beginning to keep Jane Thornhill in a manner to which her father would like her to have become accustomed. Now we come to James Gibbs, the man responsible for this building. And this is one of my, this is not the, Hogarth did a print of him, but I rather like this one, which is by James McArdle. And it really does, do we know which building he's in? Has anybody done a work? This is not here, is it? It looks like St. Paul's. It's, well, it could it be Mary Le Strand? It's not the Sheldonian, is it? No, I don't think it's the Sheldonian. Or the Radcliffe. Not the Radcliffe could.
Radcliffe camera.
Maybe, could be. Yeah. Well, somebody watching this will immediately be jumping up and down. Doesn't he know his architecture?
Because when we had Will Aslett along to talk about James Gibbs, he didn't actually show us this particular portrait.
Okay, well, you'll find it on the web. I had never seen this before, and I preferred to show this to you than Hogarth's own portrait, because I think this is something quite special about that. Well, here we are. We're now in the Gibbs wing here, and I'm superimposing an artist's model, architect's model. This is the Insalls project for how the Great Hall was to look, and that is presumably part of your ongoing project. And the area that's interesting me here is the bottom right-hand corner. Now, Hogarth is not going to be given an area the size of the Greenwich Room, but he is going to be given the prestige staircase, and that is prestige. That is the Great Hall, as we know it, just upstairs, and it's already full of the donors' plaques. There's not much painting room in here. But I wonder what Gibbs thought when this young man, who, if you asked him, have you ever painted anything bigger than this before? He said, no, never. But my father-in-law has. And he says, and I hear that you're going to pay an Italian to paint your hall, your staircase. Are you serious? And he managed to convince the governors that they would like a free gift. So he painted the staircase, which is just on the other side of the door here. You can see James Gibbs, this is Ricebrack's brilliant portrait bust. And there's William Hogarth looking quite chirpy, bold. And there's the staircase. I mean, it's a wonderful space. And of course, anybody bringing anybody up that staircase is going to spend a long time. This is, do you know this? This is a woodcut by Gwen Ravarat of Cambridge, a part of the Darwin family. And she did this woodblock print for your, I think, 850th.
No, I think earlier than that.
No. Was it that?
Yes, it is.
Was it a Hogarth fair? Okay. And this is a wonderful print. She's imagined William Hogarth standing on the plank. Actually, it's recognizably the staircase, beautifully done, with his rather chubby pug dog looking down at the artist. I love that. And then if you look down, you see this gentleman off the street is coming to see how it's coming along. Now, this is pure speculation. We do not know how and when William Hogarth bumped into a great hero of mine, Thomas Coram. Now, let's park that thought for the moment. What did he learn whilst Hogarth was actually at Barts? Well, he would have seen medicines being dispensed, and there he is in the Marriage a la Mode in 1745, showing you a classic range of apothecary jars as you would have had here. That's it blown up. This is a quack demonstrating a syphilitic skull. And this is what happens to the malefactors, people who are hanged. They are great meat for post-mortem. And because they've been such bad people, they let the dogs in to devour any entrails that happen to be going. Hogarth does make a moral of it, but this is the man I want to focus on, Thomas Coram. Thomas Coram saying, look, babies are being abandoned in the streets. There's no provision for them. I want to create a special institution for them. It took Coram 17 and a half years of petitioning to get that happening. And Hogarth gets into the fundraising and project. This is actually designed by Hogarth, showing Coram is a Roman toga, indicating that he's going to take you from the evil of infanticide. There's infanticide going on all over this. The woman is putting him down in the ditch over there, and down here you'll see this little fella here. And he's saying, no, this is what I want. I want an institution for these abandoned babies. And Hogarth joins the whole project for creating the founding hospital. This is Hogarth's portrait to Thomas Coram. It's at the Foundling Museum. I'm sure many of you have been there already. And each time you go, I guarantee you will see a different man if you look into the face of Thomas Coram. That is the caliber of Hogarth as a portraitist. You see something different, and you see lots of layers in that face. It's not just a happy man, a sad man. This is a man with lots going on inside that face. And in the end, they managed to create the founding hospital up there, just north of Lamb's Conduit Street, and that's what it eventually looked like. Actually, just after Hogarth died, it was complete, with the boys' wing, the girls' wing, and the chapel in the middle, where, of course, Handel was master of the music. And as it happens, that's the same scene on the Chinese punch bowl, painted by a Chinese, but we'll pass over that. This is, I suppose, Hogarth's equivalent of the wall decorations of his eminent father-in-law. Father-in-law died in 1734, so Hogarth had quite a challenge to sort of pick up the reins, and that's the court room as it was and is today, with the Hogarth portrait of Moses before Pharaoh's daughter. There are 3 Hogarths in the museum to this day, and Hogarth became an important man. And among the paintings and all of this decorative scheme is, we believe, in place by Hogarth. He is the director of the arts there. And there are 8 plaques. I'm only showing you 4, 8 plaques showing you the hospitals of London. And it is, I do not understand, if anybody watching this, if you can answer this, why among the 8 hospitals they put on the wall is Barts not one of them? It was his local hospital. He was right next to it. Anyway, who knows? Perhaps there were, but you can see there's Greenwich up at the top, Charterhouse, and that's St George's Hospital on Hyde Park Corner. Well, the foundling was as good as Thomas's intentions, but that's a whole other story. And the hospital was called the Hospital for the Maintenance and Education of Young Children, and Hogarth designed the coat of arms wherever it appears. One of the battles I have when I talk about Hogarth is people say, oh, the caricaturist. And I said, no, he can caricature, but that is not what you call him. He is a major artist. And if you want any proof of that, look at the final scene of marriage a la mode, 1745. By this time, the Foundling Hospital is established and Hogarth is getting lots and lots of clients. He's a canny man. And this is a close-up of that final scene where the child was being held up to his mother. She's just committed suicide because she's heard her lover has been hanged at Tyburn, another jolly little story. And there's the nurse. You can see there's a tear running down her cheek. I mean, that detail on the painting itself would fit between my fingers. And when you look at detail like that, you realize this man is not a caricaturist. His heart is in this. He is an extraordinarily compassionate man. Okay, so there is the second scene from Marriage a la Mode. This is what you asked me right at the start, what got me into it. It was seeing this that did it, the story of this unhappy marriage. Here it starts in the left and it ends with that suicide in the bottom left. And if you look really closely, you'll see there are lots and lots of ceramics. And suddenly I realized I can talk about ceramics and actually illustrate them, because the Hogarth lives slap bang in the middle of one of the most important periods of ceramic development, from 1697 up to 1764. That's the house they were able to buy in Chiswick. These are their staff, and again, those are human faces. I mean, I think this is one of the most beautiful paintings we have in Britain. And it tells you a lot about those poor people who are servants to the Hogarths, but it tells you about their masters and mistresses as well. And at the same time, we have happy people. And here, the very cheerful Graham children. This is the great, I don't know if it's coming across. Can you see in the top right-hand corner, there's a great, lovely cat trying to bamboozle this poor little finch in the cage. This is in the National Gallery. It's one of our great paintings. It's huge. And the little boy playing the serenette in order to encourage the bird to sing, thinking that he's doing so, not realizing the bird is being terrified by the cat over his shoulder. And the poignant little note is this little lad, Henry, he was actually dead before Hogarth completed the painting. 1 in 3 live births made it to adulthood in Hogarth's time. So, one should bear that in mind. Childhood was a dangerous phase. And here, going right back to the very early Hogarth pictures, this one dates to about the 1731 period. And here you see a child's tea party with a doll, a toy table, and the dog is demolishing the china on the table by running through it. The boy's playing the drum. The dog doesn't like the boy playing the drum, and the whole thing is going onto the ground, exactly as we saw a detail of it in Harlots' Progress. There's our hero in his late 40s, and there he is at about the same time, done by his friend, Louis-Francois Roubilliac, arguably the greatest sculptor of his age. And what do we see here? Any advance on grievous bodily harm? I don't know. That remained with Hogarth's widow after his death in 1764. She died in 1789. She outlived him by almost a generation. And here is a catalogue that was printed when it was sold. And when you look at the bottom of the catalogue there, you see a little dog, their dog, Trump. And there on the right, you see the Chelsea porcelain model of Trump that's in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Well, Grayson Perry has his pugs as well. There is a pug in each one of his 6 tapestries, but we don't have time for them. And we don't have time for the Midnight Modern conversation, but spare a thought for those gentlemen going down. I think what was for them a very, very important journey. And there is Thornhill Jr., and there is the churchyard of St. Nicholas's, and there is one of Hogarth's very, very closest friends, David Garrick, in the role of Richard III. The painting is up in Liverpool. This depicts Richard III at the moment. when he's been told that his body has been found in a car park in Leicester. And it's one of the great theatrical portraits there is. And it remained in the repertoire so that in the 19th century, we will see it again. Farewell, great painter of mankind who reached the noblest point of art, whose pictured morals charm the mind and through the eye correct the heart. If genius fire thee, reader, stay. If nature touch thee, drop a tear. If neither move thee, turn away. For Hogarth's honoured dust lies here. Written by David Garrick on his tomb. And there he is in the 19th century as a Staffordshire figure. Anyhow, I've tried to catch some of the moments in Hogarth's time, some of the extraordinary winding. Can I finish with this? Do we have time?
Please do.
Hogarth had planned on writing an autobiography, but it never came to anything. We have fragments of it. He even wrote a dedication, his intended dedication to the self-portrait, and it echoes something that happened in the peregrination. It's called the No dedication. Not dedicated to any prince in Christendom for fear it might be thought an idle piece of arrogance. Not dedicated to any man of quality for fear it might be thought too assuming. Not dedicated to any learned body of men as either of the universities or the Royal Society for fear it might be thought an uncommon piece of vanity. Not dedicated to any friend for fear of offending another. Therefore, dedicated to nobody. But if for once we may suppose that nobody to be everybody, it is often said to be, as everybody is often said to be nobody, then is this work dedicated to everybody by their most humble and devoted servant, William Hogarth.
Thank you, Lars.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, while our in-person audience gathers their thoughts about any questions, and also online, if you'd like to ask a question online, could you make use of the Q&A button it's usually at the top of your screen, or possibly depending on how your screen is laid out on another side, then we'll do our best to answer them. Chairman's prerogative.
Go on.
The dent in the forest.
I was at the National Gallery one afternoon, the National Portrait Gallery, and went up to the top floor where that bust is normally kept. And I went in there and it wasn't there. And I said to the man who was guarding the room, I said, what's happened to Mr. Hogarth? Oh, so you mean the gentleman with the dent? And I said, yes, that's right, yes. And he said, well, so he's gone off for a clean, because we're reorganizing the room. He's gone off for a clean, but he will be back, sir. He will be back. Incidentally, sir, you know how he got the dent? Nobody knows. Nobody knows. You know how he got the dent? I said, no. Well, sir, he got it standing on a rake. Good job.
Yeah. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything. Any questions within the room, please? Wendy.
Can I just say that Richard III has been very properly rehoused in the cathedral in Leicester?
I know. I know indeed. Well, it's very good of you to point, not without a scuffle and a tussle. And the bishop, the then Bishop of Leicester, who did quite a lot of cruises, he told me that on one of his talks on the cruise, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to report that we have now found the body of Richard III, and having done so, the search is now on for his horse." And this is the time of the stake crisis, and the search is focusing on the car park at Tesco's.
Any more? If you'd like to ask your questions, and then I will have to repeat the question for the benefit of our online audience. William.
My question is the Harlots progress. You said last he earned £1,000, which is obviously a considerable sum. How did he earn £1,000? Because it wasn't a commission. So did they make copies? How did he earn it?
Thank you.
So the question relates
Yeah.
to the Harlots progress, which earned Hogarth a total of £1,000. But how did he actually come by that considerable sum?
Well, bear in mind, he'd been a printer himself. He learned how to engrave. He became a printer. So it was natural for him to look at his 6 paintings and think, I'm going to have to sell these. And then I'm going to have to paint some more. Hang on, why didn't I engrave these? So he actually engraves them himself. That doesn't carry on all the way through his life, but it sets a pattern. He engraves them himself, knowing that he can sell these. As it happens, he's right. He couldn't possibly have known that. There'd be huge demand for them. And he sells off about 1,000 sets of them. I think it's about 1,000. It's several hundred sets. And he makes over £1,000. And so by that, he becomes something completely new. He becomes an independent, self-propelling artist. Until now, in England, all artists relied on patrimony and commissions. Okay, Hogarth did do some patrimony. He did, but he only painted people he wanted to paint, but a large part of his income from then on is that formula: paint it, print it, sell it many times. So that's a big point to make about Hogarth.
And can you give us some idea in present day sums how much £1,000 then would be worth now?
Well, it depends on what you're comparing. If you're comparing it with Mars bars,
yes, because I know
there weren't any around.
There's economic value. There's purchasing power. There's,
I think people generally, art historians, are quite happy to make round numbers. So I think if you put at least 2 noughts on the end, I think you could certainly say, I don't know whether Will agrees with that one. I would say that £1,000 is £100,000. Could well, arguably 100. The thing is,
I mean, we of course on the walls of the Great Hall have the original governors who gave £50 to become a hospital governor. You can have your name added to the wall today, and it's £50,000.
There we are.
That's the increase we're looking at.
So that's 2 noughts. Yeah.
If anyone's interested,
I think you find that 3 noughts, Lars.
Oh, sorry. Was it? I'm sorry.
No. £50, £50,000.
Yes, of course.
Let me get my calculator.
Yes. Well, everybody watching this who's got their wallet ready, can you get another wallet ready, please? Yeah. No, it was a lot of money, and it made him independent. That's the main thing. What does it buy? It buys you independence as an artist.
Excellent. Well, I think. Please, sir.
You remind us that the Rakes progress paintings from the Thames. Am I right in thinking that the Harlots progress paintings have gone missing? Or
the Harlots progress paintings were sold by Hogarth, and they ultimately, in his lifetime, were sold to Beckwith of Fonthill Abbey. And there was a catastrophic fire there I think in 1755, and it was generally thought that all of the Harlots progress was perished in that within Hogarth's own lifetime. But just occasionally, a somewhat charred painting comes up on the London auction market, which is argued as being possibly a survivor. There is an image of the harlot in her chamber kicking the table up at Dalmeny House up in Scotland, which I've had a close look at. I think generally it's agreed it's a copy. It's not, but that's not unusual. It could even have been a copy in his own lifetime. And we know that the Midnight Modern Conversation was copied many, many, many times. And in fact, we don't have the original painting in. We don't know where the original painting is. So yeah. Oh, what we didn't say, which is an important thing to say about the Rakes progress, Hogarth was so fed up having seen the pirating of all of the prints he'd done up until then, including the Harlot. There were rip-offs straight away. The moment the Harlot was on the street, other people were engraving the same thing, and he launched a petition with other artists for a Copyright Act. And that was passed, and he held back the Rakes Progress prints until it was actually enacted. So you'll find in the bottom of the genuine Rakes Progress, it says, printed as the Act directs. And that's hot off the press, that is. And that's another very important thing about Hogarth, protecting his potential and all other artists' livelihood. It's gone completely bonkers today. You know, there's the right of pursuit of your art. The French have really got it down to a fine tea now. But that's another question.
I'm afraid we've run right out of time. I'm sure that Lars will be pleased to answer questions after we stop the transmission. But Lars, thank you so much for a fascinating, yet another angle of Bart's most famous artist. Looking back at the 2 years of webinars that we've been running, we've been looking at so many facets of Barts, its history, its people. Don't forget that if you are planning to visit the hospital, if you do so on a Friday, then the City Blue Badge tours now take in Barts as a specific item on their itinerary, and there's a link to book those tours through the Barts Heritage website, bartsheritage.org.uk. As far as future events from our own are concerned, well, we're still busy mapping out our programme through the coming months. We are working on a walking tour of Barts with our guest Claire Hogarth, that many of you will have seen, the archaeologist who was responsible for some of the recent excavation of the Barts site during the rebuilding of the hospital. And so we're planning a walking tour with her at some stage during the summer months. And obviously we'll be issuing news of that in one of our regular newsletters. Lars, thank you. It's been a fascinating tour, and we look forward to hearing more about Hogarth and indeed ceramics in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.